Okay, have you ever really stopped to think about this? How a language that was once just spoken by a few tribes on a tiny little island is now used by billions of people all over the planet. I mean, it is an absolutely incredible story of invasion, empire, and constant evolution. So, let's dive right in.
Right. This is the big question we're going to tackle today. How did this happen? And it's not just a dusty old history lesson, you know? It's really a look at how power, technology, and culture can literally shape the very words we use every single day. The journey of English, well, it's kind of the journey of the modern world itself.
So, to really get this story, we need to understand this key idea, a lingua franca. The easiest way to think about it is as a bridge language. Today, you could be a programmer in Bangalore, a pilot in Brazil, or a scientist over in Germany. And English is almost always that bridge. It's become the default language for global business, for science, and of course, for the internet.
Okay, so let's start with where English is right now, here in the 21st century. I mean, nobody's denying its status as a global language, but how it's actually used is way more complex and interesting than you might think. Now, what's really fascinating here, and this is a huge deal, is that for the first time in its entire history, most English speakers are actually non-native. Just think about that. It means the language isn't really owned by the British or Americans anymore. It's being shaped and changed every single day by people all over the world. And that's leading to these amazing new regional versions, like Singlish in Singapore or Hinglish in India, which mix English with local languages and grammar.
But to figure out how we got to this point, we have to go back. I mean, way back. Because the English language wasn't born in some peaceful, quiet library. Oh no. It was forged in the fire of conflict and conquest on the island of Britain.
This timeline just perfectly captures the chaos. First, you've got Germanic tribes bringing over the basic building blocks. Then, bam, the Vikings show up, adding everyday words like sky and leg. Then, the huge one, 1066, the Normans invade, and suddenly French is the language of power for 300 years. That's why we have fancy French words like pork for the meat, but the Anglo-Saxon word swine for the animal itself. And it's only later that stuff like the printing press and the King James Bible start to lock it all down into something we'd recognize today.
And this is where it all started. This map shows the very beginning. You've got the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, all crossing the North Sea from what we now call Germany and Denmark. Fun fact, the name English actually comes from the Angles. This was the little seed from which this giant global tree grew. So the language is finally formed. But how in the world did it get off that little island? Well, the answer, in one word, is empire. The spread of English across the globe is directly tied to centuries of political and economic power.
You can really see this happen in four big waves. First up, British colonialism, which physically carried the language by sea to pretty much every continent. Then, the Industrial Revolution kicks off in Britain, making English the language of all this new technology. After that, you see the rise of American economic power, and then finally, the nail in the coffin really, American tech domination in the 20th century. That's what made English the undisputed language of the internet and modern communication.
But here's a really important distinction. The British Empire didn't just paint the world with one brush. In places like Australia, the settlers eventually outnumbered the native population, so English became the main mother tongue. But in places like India, English was used as an administrative language on top of the local ones. This is so crucial because it shapes the world today. In one place, it's the primary language. In the other, it coexists with hundreds of local languages as the language of government and business.
So once English took root in new places, it immediately started to change. And the first and probably the most significant new version to pop up was, of course, American English.
I mean, think about it. As soon as English speakers settled in North America, the language started to drift. It was separated by a massive ocean from its home, and all of a sudden, it was bumping up against new landscapes, new peoples, and new ideas that just needed new words to describe them.
And here's a super fascinating little twist. In some ways, American English is actually more old-fashioned than British English. This quote points out that the way Americans pronounce the R sound in words like car or hard is probably a kind of linguistic fossil. It's how the English themselves used to speak back in the 1600s, but it's a feature that later vanished in a lot of England. Kind of wild, right?
And that brings us all the way to today. Because the latest great force changing the English language isn't an empire or an invasion. It's that little supercomputer that you carry around in your pocket.
This cartoon just perfectly captures a uniquely modern anxiety.
The character gets a text that's just a smiley face. That's it, and is immediately thrown into a crisis about how to respond. A simple smiley back? A winking face? What if a laughing face is too much? We've all been there.
And here's the thing. Digital communication, like texting, has stripped away all our normal cues, our tone of voice, our body language. So, in response, we've had to invent a whole new layer on top of our language. We're talking emojis, GIFs, creative punctuation, all to signal the emotion and the intent that our words alone can't quite carry anymore. This isn't some small tweak, it's a fundamental rewiring of how we communicate.
And this whole evolution is happening so fast that it's creating a real generational gap. This cartoon is perfect. It shows an older couple just totally stumped by what sounds like a secret code being spoken by the young people walking past them. And here's the translation of that code. It's a language of extreme abbreviation and symbols, all driven by the need to be fast and informal on a tiny screen. See ya, I'll text you later. It's simple, it's effective, but to an outsider, it's completely baffling. This is a whole new dialect, and it wasn't created by geography, but by the culture of the screen. We are literally watching English evolve in real time, faster than ever before.
So wow, we've gone from Germanic tribes crossing the North Sea, through the massive spread of an empire, to the rise of American English, and we've landed in a world of texts and emojis. It has been a wild and totally unpredictable ride, which leaves us with one final, fascinating question. What's next? What's the next evolution of English going to be? How will things like AI, or global culture, or the next wave of technology continue to shape the world's lingua franca?